choice, which revision should be made to correct the sentence? So nothing in the question is right away framing my brain on what I should focus on, but as soon as I look at the choices, I see comma, 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 comma. So right away, what I know is that they're testing me about commas. That's what they're testing me on. So right away, I open my toolbox in my brain of what are all the ways that I learned grammatically to use a comma. That's where my brain is thinking. That's my point of reference before I even start fully reading this question. Okay, so that being said, we go ahead and we start reading. So we have, to surprise her dad for his birthday on Friday, Yolanda ordered tempting, savory sandwiches from a deli in her neighborhood, prepared his favorite chocolate cake, and invited his best friends over for the evening. Okay, so what are the ways that you guys know to use a comma? Just throw it in the chat. There are so many right answers. Yeah, perfect. So somebody said list. A lot of people.
Yes, keep going, everyone. Type into the chat. Okay.
Good. Adjectives, but that's part of listing adjectives. Okay, good. Yes. We have combining dependent clauses. Excellent. Yep, now you guys are getting it. Modifier, absolutely. Come on, what else? Simple ways. How else do we use a comma? Almost daily. Yeah, to fix a run-on, sure. Or combine independent dependent clauses. And then we have like the basic way, which is not really tested, but it's also used like for dates, for places, right? The way that we know commas. Okay, so now let's see what did they do here? Well, we have several things here. So first we have this beginning part, to surprise her dad for his birthday on Friday. This is kind of a modifier or a dependent clause. So we have a modifier here / dependent clause. So like you guys said, that's absolutely a legitimate need for a comma. So we just explain this comma, right? This comma belongs here based on what you guys told me. So we can get rid of choice A. Next, we have tempting and savory. So tempting and savory, how would you guys describe those words? What kind of words are those? What part of speech? Yeah, perfect, right? Those are adjectives. So when we have two adjectives back to back, we are listing them. So you have to put a comma between them. You cannot have two adjectives back to back with no comma. So we just solved our first question together, and our answer here is choice B. We put a comma, correct. And just for the completion of the notes, we'll label our little list is reasons to use a comma. All right, excellent, guys. All right, so moving on to question number 2. Which sentence in this paragraph contains an error in its construction and should be revised? So again, you have to frame your brain, right? So they're telling me error in its construction. So I'm thinking about like sentence structure as I am starting to read all of these sentences. So the key word for me here is construction. Okay, so we have on the evening of July 13, 2019. And what you can notice is all the commas, right? We always want to legitimize them. So we said we use commas for dates. We put that on the evening of July 13, 2019. That's like a phrase or another dependent clause or a subjective clause. So this comma is appropriate here. A major power outage affected the Upper West Side of Manhattan in New York City, leaving approximately 73,000 residents without electricity for 3 long hours. Lights did not function, refrigerators did not stay cold, and air conditioners did not work. Okay, so what I want to tell you guys is that whenever you have a sentence that starts with an ing word, like in this case, leaving, the mistake or the test that the idea that should come to your head is, are they testing me about a modifier? So I want you to just hammer that into your head because that is the most common way that they test modifiers here. So anytime that your sentence begins with an ing word, you should think about a modifier. Okay, so what does that mean? So leaving blah, 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 blah without electricity, blank, right? So the way you should think about this is whenever you have that ing word, number one, you think about a modifier. So you think, okay, leaving, okay, Olga told me that this could be a modifier mistake. Number two, you ask yourself the question of who or what is doing that ing word. So you have to ask, in this case, we would say who/what is leaving. And the storm left them without electricity. Does that make sense to everybody? Or the power outage, whatever you want to call it. But definitely it wasn't refrigerators. Does that make sense? Or definitely it wasn't lights. So the way that this works is whenever you have this kind of modifying phrase that starts with ing, whatever it is modifying needs to be the main noun in your sentence. So that needs to come either directly after the comma or very close to the comma. And in this case, it doesn't. And in this case, it becomes very confusing. And if we didn't have sentence one, this would completely not make sense. Does that make sense to everybody? So in clear and correct construction, the modifier needs to be near the word that it is describing in order to prevent that confusion. So it can't be in a separate sentence. So the fact that we don't say the words power outage in sentence 2 means that this is a modifier mistake and F is our answer. So again, just to summarize for you guys, anytime you start a sentence with an ing word, you should think, what is this a modify? What is this modifying? What is this ing word modifying? And you ask yourself, who or what is it modifying? Who or what left the 73,000 residents without electricity? And once you have your answer to that question, in this case, based on this context, it's the major power outage, then you look for that modifier very close to the sentence. It should be right after that comma phrase, like 1 or 2 words apart. And if it's not in there, then you got your modifying mistake. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, moving on to number 3. So it looks like some people are still confused about a modifier. A modifier is just an ing phrase. And it modifies usually a noun. So for example, something like looking up at the sky, the boy didn't notice So for example, this sentence that I just made up, looking up at the sky, the boy didn't notice the crack in the floor and fell. So again, your method is always going to be, you see the ing word, right? You see the phrase looking up at the sky. You circle looking because that's the ing word, and you say who or what is looking. In this case, it's the boy, and you notice that the boy is directly after the phrase. So there is no modifying mistake here. But in the sentence that we just did, the word was leaving, and who or what was leaving was the major power outage, and it wasn't even in the same sentence. So that's when it becomes a mistake, when the noun is not near the modifying phrase. Absolutely, it's like a participle, yeah. Does that make sense? Are you guys good? It can be other than ing for sure, but in my experience, like it's almost always ing, the way that it's tested on this exam. So that's why I teach you guys a pattern of whenever you see an ing word at the beginning of the sentence, you should consider this type of mistake because it's very common, but it can be not ing words. Okay, cool. Moving on to number 3. So we have Yelena, sorry, Michael and Malcolm love making pancakes with their granddad on Saturday morning. Okay, so what are we noticing here, right? This comma, these commas are all good, right? You guys told me before, whenever you have a list, we keep commas. We need commas for a list, right? So far, so good. All those commas belong there. So right away, I'm not interested in choice A. But just for teaching purposes, like on test day, that would be enough for me to eliminate choice A and move on to save time. But for teaching purposes for you guys here, I want to talk about why this is the correct pronoun there. So there is a pronoun that replaces, it's possessive, and it replaces Yelena, Michael, and Malcolm's granddad, right? But the important teaching point is that it's plural. Absolutely. Somebody already put it in the chat. You guys are teaching for me today because you're so prepared. It's plural. So it's all of their grandpas. So we use the word there to highlight that it's plural. If it was just Yelena, we could say with her granddad. If it was just Michael, we would say with his granddad. But because it's all 3 of them, we say their granddad. And this is matching. So the big thing that I always teach you guys with grammar is that you want things to match. So you want things to match plurality. So if your subject in this case is plural, we have 3 people, your pronouns are plural. And your verb is also plural, right? That's why we say love instead of loves. So it all matches. Okay, next we have Yelena's job is to open the box and pour the pancake mix into a bowl, slowly adding water, eggs, melted butter, and blueberries. Now we have another situation, right? So we have is singular or plural as a verb? Good, right? Is singular, absolutely. And in this case, is it correct to use it here singularly? What's our subject? Yeah, it's correct, right? What's our subject? Yelena, right? And Yelena is one person. So it's completely good for us to use the singular verb. So we're all good. We would get rid of choice B. There's no mistake there. Next, Michael uses a wooden spoon to vigorously stir the mixture until it is smooth. And Malcolm helps Granddad carefully pour the batter onto a griddle, 1/4 cup at a time. Okay, so now again, it is smooth, right? And they're asking us, should we change it to they are? So the common pattern that you guys should be noticing here is that they're testing us about plurality, whether or not it agrees, right? They're testing us about agreement, right? So now you have to ask yourself, what is smooth? And the answer is the mixture. And then you ask yourself, is the mixture singular or plural? What do you guys think? Singular, good. So is it correct? Is it the correct pronoun to use? Right, correct, because it is also singular. So with that, we can eliminate choice C. And at this point, we're pretty sure that the answer is D, but let's just prove it to ourselves. So we have Granddad turns each pancake when they start to bubble. Uh-oh, so now what is they replacing? Absolutely, each pancake. And is each pancake singular or plural? Singular, good. So that means that they is wrong because they is plural, and this should be until it starts to bubble. And then here, sweet, delicious breakfast. This is what we talked about in the past. There's 2 adjectives, right? Back to back. We can't just have a list of 2 adjectives back to back without a comma. That's why the comma belongs after sweet. So it's very important for you guys to understand that they're testing you plurality, and it's very important for you guys to be comfortable with this, whether or not verbs and pronouns are singular or plural. So let's go over some really basic ones. just to make sure that we're on the same page. So singular. So someone's asking me why, like, once I know that, that this first mistake is not wrong, why I don't check the second mistake. So the problem is that in the options, you can't just, they tell you to change this part and change that part, right? So if this is not true, then this choice automatically becomes not true. Does that make sense? So that's why I skip it to save time. I'd usually try to review everything with you guys like during these webinars, but on a real test, it's a good strategy to do that because you're working much faster and you don't have to check those answers because just logically, as soon as you prove to yourself that the comma it belongs there after Yelena, you don't really care about this. And in fact, you assume that this has to be correct. So you can actually use this to your advantage for other questions. Does that make sense to everybody as a strategy? Okay, so plural, singular. So I just want to go over the very common verbs and pronouns that you guys should know. So first of all, how do we know if a noun is singular or plural? Like, I'll give you guys an example. One dog, many dogs, right? Usually there's an S at the end, right? So nouns are easy. Sometimes there are some exceptions. So for example, one person, and we say many people, not many persons. But those examples are usually like well known. And as native English speakers, most of you guys just naturally understand whether we're talking about one or two. And usually you guys naturally know the verbs and the pronouns too. It just sounds right to you guys, but it's important that you actually know the words as well, because sometimes the tests trick you and it could sound right or wrong, but you need to have the grammar knowledge behind you to kind of prove it to yourselves. So we already went over is singular. What's the plural form of that? Are, excellent. And then in terms of pronouns, we can say like he, she is singular. Oops. What's the plural form of that? They, good. And then we can say possessive, right? We can say his, her, it, and its. Yep, and then the plural form is there. Good. So these are like really the main ones that you guys should know and be comfortable with. And the rule of the game is everything has to match. So once you notice that your noun is singular, then your verb has to be singular. And if you replace that noun with a pronoun, that should also be singular. Of course, there's other ones, like there's other verbs, but it just gets a little bit complicated. These are the important ones that are very constant that you guys should definitely know. That's why I'm putting them in the notes. Okay, so we did it. We finished the standalone questions. Let's go ahead and go through the passage and then the reading questions. Sure, I can go back for a second, but as always, we can send you guys out the notes and the session's being recorded, so you don't have to worry too much about trying to copy everything down. Now, what I'll say about the next thing, the passage, usually I don't start with reading the passage. Usually I jump straight to the questions. And again, the reason for that is to save time. So that's what I'll kind of do with you guys. And if I feel confused, then we go back and we read the passage together. So in terms of the big things to review for grammar, we kind of did it here. You guys absolutely need to know all the uses of a comma. You should understand modifiers. You should understand the common mistakes that they test, like subject-verb agreement, subject-pronoun agreement. Something they didn't cover here on this test, on these standalone questions, is also verb tenses. That's another common thing that they test. Those are really the big topics that you want to make sure that you feel very comfortable with. And if you practice with all the DOE exams, it'll be enough It'll be enough for you guys to hit all these questions. I can write it up here just for you guys to reference. So common grammar topics to review. So commas, subject, verb, agreement. These are really the huge ones that you should like 100% be extremely comfortable with, just for you guys to know kind of what to lightly review between today and tomorrow. Yeah, and here we can also add like semicolons, colons, all of those go under the same category. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to this section now. So this section's a little bit different. It's still technically part of the grammar section, but it's part of a passage instead of the standalone questions. It's important for you guys to understand that this isn't part of the reading comprehension test, which means the types of questions they're asking you about is not so much about comprehension. It's more about like revising and editing. So imagine that your friend sent you this essay and you're revising and editing their essay. That's kind of the mindset that you should be in when you're dealing with these kinds of questions. Now, themes that come up here that I want to cover before we even look at the questions, and then we can do those together, right? So themes that come up here is that this passage is extremely structured. So when they ask you things about the first sentence in a paragraph or the conclusion, there are certain things to expect about the different types of questions because of the structure. So let me teach you guys what I mean. So in these types of things that are very structured, you should know that within your introduction, you have a thesis statement. And this is where you're going to find your main idea, right? So I wish that on reading comprehension, I can tell you guys on every single passage that your main idea is going to be there super clear in the first paragraph. Oftentimes it is, but not as consistently. On the grammar, I can tell you guys on any passage that you read, you'll find a main idea in the first paragraph. So that's what you look for in your first paragraph, a thesis statement. And if they ask you anything about, especially the last sentence, or if they ask you to edit sentence 3, or what you should replace sentence 3 with, or what you should add into the first paragraph, everything in your brain should be circling around the thesis statement. So any question they ask you about the first paragraph, you should think, do I have to formulate a thesis statement on this passage? That's the introduction. Next, once you guys get to the body paragraphs, each of those body paragraphs will open up with a topic sentence. So whenever they ask you to edit any one of these, right, either sentence 4, 8, or 12, or 18, any one of the topic sentences to the body paragraphs, you should think about two things. One, that it should be a transition from the previous paragraph. And 2, it should be an introduction of the topic of the new paragraph. So what you guys will notice is that oftentimes a good topic sentence has sort of transition words. So for example, like in this case, during the rover's mission, right? This suggests that they mentioned some mission here, right? Right here, rover's mission, right? So we're transitioning from that paragraph to this paragraph. Or here, prior to this planet-wide dust storm, right? This tells me that the last paragraph was talking about a dust storm, and now they're going to tell me some new fact. and prior is my transition, right? So oftentimes these topic sentences, they transition from the previous paragraph, they introduce the new paragraph. So if you're asked to edit those topic sentences, or to write a topic sentence, or to change the topic sentence, you should pick an option that has those transitions and that is introducing the new paragraph topic. Those are the two main things that you need to look for in those types of questions. And what helps us here is transition words, like I just pointed out to you guys, and pronouns. And then the last thing that I want to talk about with these is the conclusion. So in the conclusion, you are summarizing, right? So the key here is no new information. So, sometimes they ask you which of the following can be deleted, or they ask you which of the following should we add, something like that. Whatever you pick, no new details in the conclusion. Never bring up something that hasn't been discussed previously in the passage at all in the conclusion. That's always the wrong answer. So you should just be summarizing, you should be restating your thesis statement. Sometimes they do like a call to action at the end, like this is how you can help. Let's say if the whole passage is about global warming, they'll mention now this is like what you can do. So sometimes there's a call to action, sometimes there's a lesson. Things like that are very common in the conclusion, but never new details. So that's something that you stay away from. What I mean by pronouns is as transition words. So this is a pronoun, and this planet-wide dust storm comes from there. Or say like prior to her something, I would ask myself, who's her? And her is most likely mentioned in the paragraph above. So they're using that pronoun to transition. Does that make sense? That's what I mean by pay attention to pronouns for transitions. Okay, cool. So these are the big themes. The other big theme that I want to mention and have in your notes, I'll just squeeze it somewhere here, is oftentimes they'll ask you about like being precise, like pick the most precise answer, pick the most concise answer, whatever it is. Usually the term is precise that they use. What that means is do not be repetitive, right? So be succinct. Do not be repetitive. And the other important thing is to be specific. So stay away from generalities. So stay away from things like stuff, things, people, many, much. All of this is big no. So I'm going to take a red, I'm going to make it very thick. I'm going to put an X. This is no, especially when the question is asking you for something precise. So instead of people, tell me exactly which people. Instead of many, tell me exactly how many. So avoid those kinds of words in your answer choices, especially when the question asks you for precision. All right, so these are all the themes. So now let's just run through these questions to show you how these themes apply in this case. But what's most important for me teaching you guys this webinar, especially at this journey of where you guys are, is not these questions. Of course, I want you to understand them, but I really want you to take away these themes and be able to apply these themes to any test that you guys do without me. That's the goal coming out of today. All right, so which sentence should follow sentence 3 to best introduce the topic of the passage? What a surprise. They're asking you about a sentence to follow sentence 3. So that would be the last sentence in the first paragraph. What did I tell you about the last sentence in the first paragraph? Right, the main idea, it's the thesis, right? So that's what they're asking us for in this case. They're asking me for the thesis. Yeah, I don't know how somebody did that. They just put it in bold and bright pink. Absolutely. So not a shock, right? I've been teaching this test for a while, and I told you guys that there's patterns, and right in the first question, we see the pattern. So because I don't read the passage until sort of like I use the questions to read the entire passage. So for this question, I would read sentence 1 to 3, and I would maybe not pick a final answer yet. I would do all the other questions because it would force me to read the rest of the passage, and then I'd get to an answer. Okay, so let's read 1 to 3. So we have in 2004, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, landed a rover or robotic vehicle named Opportunity on the surface of Mars. The rover's mission was to search for evidence of water and life on the planet. The rover was designed to gather data on Mars for about 90 days, but Opportunity's assignment did not come to an end until nearly 15 years later in 2019. All right, so we have an introduction, right? We understand what the passage is going to be about. I don't yet feel comfortable like filling in what the thesis statement should be, so I leave that until the end and we keep reading. The next one is asking me to provide a better transition to the third paragraph. Again, shocker, right? I told you guys that whenever you deal with topic sentences, they like their transition words. So now we're transitioning from paragraph 2 to paragraph 3, and they're asking us which transition would be best at that. So we're going to go ahead and read paragraph 2 and paragraph 3, and the goal is to see how they are connected. So we have, during the rover's mission, a high-resolution camera on the rover's robotic arm took magnified photographs of the surface of Mars. The photographs revealed small round rocks scattered across the surface of the planet. The scientists nicknamed these rocks blueberries based on the rocks' resemblance to the fruit. These rocks were important because their spherical shape suggested that liquid water may have flowed over them for a substantial amount of time. Opportunity continued to provide valuable data about craters and other surface features. So already it seems like here, this whole paragraph is about what? If you guys could use one word to describe paragraph 2. What's your one word summary? Specifically. Yeah, the rocks, right? This paragraph is all about rocks. That's what I would say. That's the main thing that I got away with it. In almost every single sentence in the paragraph, they talk about rocks. Rocks, 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 right? So that's kind of the summary here. Here they say continued to provide valuable data about craters and other surface features. Throughout the mission, the rover traveled a total of 28.06 miles across Mars' surface. When Opportunity had traveled nearly the length of a marathon, scientists celebrated the accomplishment by naming the valley the rover was in Marathon Valley. However, in 2018, a dust storm spread all over the planet, putting the rover's progress on hold. So what about the third paragraph? Are we still talking about rocks or no? No, right? And so it's two different things, right? So this was rocks and they got the rocks via photographs. So in paragraph 2, the rover is giving us information via photographs. In paragraph 3, the rover is giving us information via traveling, right? So that's kind of how it's different. So now if we go to the options, we try to find the word that suggests that, and the best word here is actually meanwhile, because it's not necessarily it's not like contrast, but it's basically saying that both of these things happen at the same time. So one thing that was happening is that they were taking pictures and we were learning at the rocks. Meanwhile, or at the same time, it was still providing us valuable data just by traveling. And that's what this whole marathon thing is about. So that's why the best answer here is meanwhile. Next, they want us. So some people are asking why can it not be furthermore? So furthermore is kind of, it's used when you're continuing the same argument, right? You don't use furthermore when there's any sort of change. And in this case, there is a change. That's why they split it into two different paragraphs, right? So furthermore is unlikely to be used like to start a new paragraph usually, because you're usually talking about the same idea, you're just developing it further. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Okay, now they're asking us about sentence 11, and they're specifically asking us about the formal style. So they want it to sound like everything else. So we have, however, in 2018, a dust storm spread all over the planet, putting the rover's progress on hold. Okay, so however, in 2018, a dust storm covered the planet, bringing the rover's progress to a standstill. Okay, seems fine. I don't see anything wrong with this choice. Next we have in 2018, a dust storm shrouded the planet, impermanently halting the rover's progress. So these words are a little bit too much for the way that this like passage is written. This passage is written formally, but also pretty conversationally, right? So do me and you use the word shrouded or impermanently halting in conversation? No, and it's unlikely that we would see this in this kind of, I wouldn't say it's casual, but it's definitely written at a style of like speech, right? So this is overly formal. It's almost a little bit poetic. So it's just too much. So that's why F is no good. However, in 2018, a dust storm enveloped the whole of the planet. I don't like this phrase. Covered the planet is much clearer, more succinct. Remember, I told you guys to also to that one theme is succinctness, right? So just based on that, looking at all the options, like E is the best one just because it's the shortest. There's nothing wrong with it. Anytime you pick a wordy answer, it's usually wrong. You don't want to pick unless something is adding. You don't want those extra words in there, right? So envelope the whole of the planet uses 6 words to say the same thing as covered the planet, which is half that 3 words, and I'm not getting any extra information, which is why I would eliminate this choice. And same thing here, covered up the whole planet. You don't need these extra words. Okay, any questions so far? You guys are good? Okay, so let's keep going. So number 7 wants us to combine sentences 12 and 13. So another big thing for you guys to notice is that all of these questions are chronological, right? So grammar questions are chronological. That's also important for strategy because as you see, like as I told you guys, it's forcing us to read through the passage as we go along. And that way you don't have to read the passage and then do the questions and then go back to the passage to find what they were talking about. Because there's no way that you guys are going to remember what sentences 12 and 13 were on your first read, right? So that is also backing the strategy of you don't have to read the passage, this passage, you don't have to read it first. You can jump straight into the questions. The questions like are chronological, meaning they follow the pattern of the like as the passage goes on. That's how the questions are asked, right? The first question was about sentence 3, then sentence 8, then sentence 11, and now we're on 12 and 13. So that's what I mean by chronological. We're following the pattern. So let's read 12 and 13 together. I'm going to highlight it because our page is getting a little bit messy in all my annotations. I'm just going to highlight it so we all see where I'm reading. So we have prior to this planet-wide dust storm, minor dust storms had periodically deposited a layer of dust onto the solar panels of the rover. These prevented it from charging its batteries. Okay, so what's the connection between the sentence? It's this pronoun, right? So that's why when I told you guys before, transition words and pronouns are very closely linked. So you should use them to your advantage in terms of figuring out the relationships or connections between sentences. So when it starts with these prevented it from charging its batteries, these are the storms, right? These minor storms. And because of that layer of dust, it's not allowing the solar panels to charge the rover. So we have to combine the two sentences, understanding how they are related, understanding their how one flows into the next is basically what I'm trying to say. Okay, so let's look at the options they're giving us. So we have Preventing the rover from charging its batteries, minor dust storms had periodically deposited a layer of dust onto the solar panels of the rover prior to this planet-wide dust storm. So A is very confusing. So the problem is this part, this planet-wide dust storm, this beginning, right, prior to this planet-wide dust storm, this is our transition piece, right? Remember I told you guys that the first sentence has to transition from the paragraph before, and this sentence, this last paragraph ends with a dust storm, and the new paragraph begins with prior to that dust storm. So we cannot mess with that part of it. That part has to stay, right? Because that is doing the piece of the transitioning. So we cannot mess with that kind of order. So right away, I'm kind of like not into any of these choices because I can see that they take out that beginning versus choice D keeps it. So right away, I'm kind of more interested in choice D. I will also notice right away that A and C are 3 lines wrong, right? Remember I told you guys about being succinct. Versus B and D are shorter. So right away, I would be really picking between B and D. And if I don't really read choice D and I'm like, oh, this is a horrible choice for whatever reason, then I would reassess. But just based on my experience with this test and just looking at what this looks like, I'm very unlikely to think that A or C is the answer because of the length and because they remove that beginning piece, which is necessary for the transition. And after we read choice D is the best option. There's nothing wrong with it. It is succinct. And it adds this last piece, preventing it from charging its batteries. And it's very clear that it, in this case, is the rover, right? The pronoun and the noun are close together. So there's no sort of confusing pronoun in this case, and everything is clear. Okay. Are you guys good? Any questions? So somebody said, what do I mean by confusing pronoun? So confusing pronoun is another type of common grammar mistake that they sometimes test you guys on. So if I say something like Martin wanted to return or let's say I say Martin wanted to give his laptop to Jason, but he was going away. So we've got pronouns here, right? We've got his and we have he, and then we have Martin and Jason. And it becomes confusing when the pronouns aren't clear of who's who. So did Martin want to give Martin's laptop to Jason, or did Martin want to give Jason's laptop to Jason, right? Because this his, we don't know who it's talking about. And that's what I mean by confusing pronoun error. And same thing with he, who is going away? Was it Martin or was it Jason? The way that this is written, you guys can't tell me for certain. So this is another common mistake that they test. It's like unclear pronoun, or I call it confusing pronoun, whatever you want to call it. But that's something that I also check on whenever I have pronouns. So in this case, I have preventing it from charging, and I always ask myself, preventing what from charging? And in this case, it's the rover, and it's clear because the rover is right next to it. So there's nothing else that's confusing. There's no other noun that it could be. All right, moving on. So one of Opportunity's major contributions was finding possible evidence of the presence of water on Mars. So the question is, where should we add this information? And you notice that all the options are pretty high up, so within the first or second paragraph. So where do we want to put this, basically, is the question. So it's introducing the topic of water, and that's kind of been mentioned in the beginning of this paragraph, right? This idea is mentioned why the rocks were important, because they suggest that liquid water may have flowed over them. So since that's a big conclusion at paragraph 2, in the beginning of paragraph 2, the topic sentence could bring that up. So that's why I would put this at the beginning of the second paragraph, because topic of water was introduced in the second paragraph. It wouldn't make sense to put it at the end of the second paragraph because we already mentioned that detail, right, about the small rocks and their formation suggesting liquid water. So we never go from detail back to general topic of possible water. It's usually general topic, and then we go into details. So that's why it's not placed at the end. It should be placed at the beginning of that paragraph. And finally, this is asking us about a concluding sentence after sentence 20. So at this point, we've read most of the paragraph. I'm just going to go ahead and now read the conclusion. So we have opportunity was an important asset in scientists' study of Mars. It returned valuable data about our neighbor planet and survived powerful dust storms. NASA described the mission of Opportunity as one of the most successful and enduring feats of interplanetary exploration. Even though this rover's journey ended, other rovers still roam the surface of Mars. So what should we add at the end? So choice A, these rovers, including one named Curiosity, will help scientists answer their lingering questions. This doesn't talk about this. This is new, right? Curiosity. We've never mentioned curiosity before. So I told you guys to stay away from anything new, right? This passage is about opportunity. So we want the conclusion, the last sentence, to be summarizing something to do with opportunity. Today's rovers continue to add to Opportunity's discovery and will help us learn even more about the planet. Much better, right? Because it transitions from these rovers, but it still focuses on opportunities. Next, and in conjunction with these rovers, on a grammar test, you definitely don't want to start a sentence with and right away. I don't like that. And then this is all new information. And it focuses on Mars characteristics instead of anything to do with opportunities. So that's why this is no good. All right. And with that, we're almost done. We just have to remember that we left this one blank, but now we should be really comfortable because we know what the main idea is, right? We know what the thesis is because we just read the whole thing. So I'm looking for a choice that introduces the topic. Again, we just talked about it with the conclusion. It should be something about opportunity, and it should be about how successful and like something positive about it. And it should be, the other thing that helps with the thesis is look at the topics of each paragraph and try to see that they're all involved a little bit in the thesis. So in the beginning of the second paragraph, we learn about that it took pictures, that it traveled long distances, and that it provided us with all these data about the features of Mars, right? So we're looking for something like that. And valuable contributions is kind of like that umbrella term that covers all of those things. So if we look at the options, right, this is no good because it only talks about water, and that's not the only topic of the entire passage. This is bad because it only talks about overcoming challenges. It doesn't talk about any of the good things or the achievements, which is what each paragraph talks about. And then this is just about the original timeline and how long it took. And the fact that it was 15 years versus 5 years or whatever it was is only one detail. So that's why this is no good. So you're looking for something like this, like valuable contributions, something like very general for a thesis, that you could fit all of those subtopics of each paragraph under. And the last thing that I want to mention to you guys, which is just a general theme also, is once you're done reading a passage, try to ask yourself about the connotation. So is the author ultimately talking about whatever topic positively or negative? So in this case, the author definitely had a positive viewpoint, right, of this Mars rover. If we look through the types of adjectives he's talking about, he's saying valuable data set, survived powerful dust storms, one of the most successful and enduring feats, So it's the author throughout the passage is using very positive words. So overall, the connotation here is positive. So when you're picking answers, especially about the thesis or about the conclusion sentence, you're looking for other words that are very similar and have that same hue of positivity. So valuable is coming up again here, and that's positive. Does that make sense? All right, guys, so we did it. We got through the entire first section, the grammar. All right, so we are now halfway through our lesson and we're going to transition to reading comp. So everybody take a second to wake yourselves up, do a little stretch. Do you guys have any questions for grammar? I think this was a really good review for you guys because I mentioned the general topics that you should be reviewing, not just focusing on these specific questions. So again, those are my takeaways. Try to pull out the themes of what I'm talking about, the topics to review. Also understand these questions, but that should be secondary. All right, everybody's good? All right, so we're going to move on to reading comprehension. Okay, so with reading comprehension, unfortunately, I wish that I could give you guys a nice little roadmap and tell you where all the answers are and what the structure is going to be. But you guys are only so lucky, right? For the grammar portion. That's why I really try to stress that so hard, because if you guys can take away what I'm saying, you're going to get those questions right. But with the reading comprehension, it's kind of a different approach, less predictable. So the way that I like to teach this is you guys have to focus on trying to use strategies to understand in general what the author is talking about and use that information to help you answer the questions. So certain strategies are going to stay the same. So for example, connotation is still going to be a thing here. So you guys should still be thinking about that. So I'm going to put that up here in our corner. The other thing that will help you is understanding the types of passages that you're going to be reading. So you know that this is some sort of excerpt, and it's called the Food Business Incubator. So you understand that whatever piece that we're reading is from some other bigger piece. And then the other thing to look at here is there's all of these words that they're defining for you. Anytime that that's the case, you definitely want to look at your subscripts and understand those words. Does that make sense? Just give me a second. Okay. So let's go ahead and start reading. So you guys, with this, you absolutely have to read the full passage, and I recommend annotating. So it's hard to teach you guys something brand new, right? So if you haven't been annotating in the past, it's kind of hard for me to tell you guys that you should start now because your test is so soon. But either way, I think it's worth it. And I think it's worth it for you guys to learn how to be good annotators. And the way to be a good annotator is there has to be a method to your madness. You can't just be underlining random stuff and circling random stuff and choosing that, well, this word gets a little wiggly and this word gets a line and this word gets a circle, and it doesn't really make any sense to you, right? The point of annotating is that you're making the passage more digestible to yourself in some way. And you don't have to do it in the same way that I do it or in the same way that any other tutor does it, right? The goal is for you guys to learn about a digestible way for yourselves. And I can show you guys my way, but that should just be an example, a template, and then you should make it your own. So for example, what I usually like to do is I like to underline as I go, and I just underline things that I think are important. It also just helps me stay focused. Just having the pen to the paper and underlining as I'm reading allows me to, like I have to keep reading because I keep underlining, and it doesn't allow my brain to wander for me to look around when I take an exam. So that's that's important for me. So I like underlining, but understand that my underlines are more for my focus, right? So how do I actually make the passage more digestible for myself on a reading test? So I try to have a pattern with names and with dates or places, right? So whenever I come across a name, I try to always highlight that name in the same way. So anytime I have a name, let's say that I square it, or anytime I see a date or a place, let's say that I circle it, or you could squiggly underline it, whatever you do, right? But the purpose of doing that for me is that whenever later on in the question they ask me about, let's say this guy, Caleb Zigas, instead of having to run to the passage and just skim, and I'm nervous and I'm like, I know that they were talking about this guy somewhere, but I don't remember where, and I'm wasting time skimming. It's very easy for my eyes to just jump to all my squares and know that somewhere within those squares is mentioned that name. Does that make sense? So I just create a map for myself to make it easier to maneuver that passage. So that's kind of my strategy with annotating. And it's an easy strategy for you guys to take away and apply. And same thing with dates, because sometimes in the question they mention a date or a place. And again, if I know that all my dates are circles, I just have an easy systematic way to go through all the circles and find where they mention that, to find the detail that's going to give me the right answer. So that's a big strategy for reading comp. And then the last thing that I'll say is your answers are all in here, right? So the biggest strategy that you guys should use is you should match the language of the passage to the answers, right? The answers are all in here, right in front of you. You don't have to synthesize them. You don't have to make them. You don't have to solve anything like you do in math. They're here. You just have to get better at finding them. And one way that helps me find them is they have to sound like the passage. So they use the same types of words. So sometimes they use the same exact words. Sometimes they use synonyms. So you have to get good at pulling out those important words from the passage, matching them to the answers to get to your right answer. All right, so that's kind of my, lowdown on what you guys should be doing and thinking about, and just a brief review of reading comprehension. And now let's go ahead and get into this passage. First thing you're always going to do is you're going to read the title. Every single passage, you read the title. It helps you with the main idea, whether you think so or not. Usually it's subconscious. It just allows you to think about the theme of what you're going to be reading about. So this is an excerpt from the Food Business Incubator. Okay, so now let's read. I'm going to read out loud and you guys please follow along. So we have La Cocina means the kitchen in Spanish. It's also the name of a business incubator. And a business incubator is a company that helps new and startup companies develop by providing services such as management, training, and office space. Okay, so it seems like La Cocina is going to be our topic here, right? And it's the kitchen in Spanish. It's also a part of it's a business incubator based in San Francisco's Mission District. I'm going to circle San Francisco because it's a place and that seems like it's going to be our setting. Since it began in 2005, it's been helping local food entrepreneurs, many of whom are low-income immigrant women, develop their small businesses. Over the years, many of its alumni had found success. More than 50 chefs in its program have become self-sufficient business owners, and many of them have opened their own brick-and-mortar restaurants. 2 alumni were even recognized as semi-finalists for the prestigious James Beard Awards. And these are awards named after an American cook and author, James Beard. And it's considered the highest honor in culinary industry. A new cookbook, We Are La Cocina, Recipes in Pursuit of the American Dream, tells some of their stories. Executive Director Caleb Zigas says that the nonprofit La Cocina grew out from 2 grassroots economic development organizations whose mission is to promote economic improvement within a specific geographic area. who found many people cooking at their homes and selling food on the streets. The vendors needed an affordable commercial kitchen space and technical assistance in order for their businesses to be legally viable. La Cocina provided just such a space, in addition to helping them develop business plans, pull city permits, and more. Zikas says that as many as 8 businesses can work in the kitchen space at La Cocina at any one time. Some can prep for farmers market sales, corporate catered gigs, or weddings, while others might be making and packaging their food products. It's just an incredible and exciting range of techniques, flavors, perspectives, age, language, and that's a really beautiful thing, he says. Twice a year, La Cocina hosts F&B, Voices from the Kitchen, a storytelling project where their chefs can tell their own stories as they do in the new cookbook. Some of the chefs will be on tour to promote the book, whose proceeds go to support La Cocina entrepreneurs. NPR, which is the National Public Radio, a nonprofit media organization that produces news and cultural programming, caught up with La Cocina chefs who shared their stories. And now they're going to give us a little bit of each one of these chefs, right? So we have this guy, Mariko Grady, Aiden, fermented foods. At La Cocina, you can often hear Mariko Grady singing or humming as she prepares miso, koji, and amasaki. Her fermented products come in 4 different flavors, including mushroom and chicken, to be used in soups and sauces. She originally brought the fermenting rice and barley koji seeds from Japan, where she had a 30-year career as a singer and dancer with the prestigious modern theatrical dance group she founded, Papa Tarahumara. They performed around the world and 16 years ago had a one-night show in San Francisco. The man who would become her husband was in the audience. She soon joined him in San Francisco, often returning to Tokyo to rehearse. But after the earthquake and tsunami hit Japan in 2011, her company disbanded. Grady focused on nourishing her family and creating a line of fermented products that she sells online at local Bay Area stores and at the Ferry Plaza Farmers Market. She began at La Cocina in 2012 and named her business after her son, Aiden. Written in kanji characters, the name means wisdom and handed down from generation to generation. Her fermented products are also full of wisdom about how to relate to nature and how to create a healthy life, she says. And then, so that was one story. And the second story is Shani Jones, Peaches Patties. Shani Jones is a native San Franciscan. Her father was born in New Orleans, her mother in Jamaica. She says their home was always filled with a variety of spices and dishes like jerk chicken and Jamaican patties. Savory pastries filled with beef or chicken. Jones says she learned to cook from her mother, whose nickname was Peaches. After returning from college in Atlanta, Jones worked on her doctorate in organizational leadership and management while driving a Lyft car. And a Lyft is like an Uber, a ride-sharing company. She often told passengers about her idea of opening a catering company with her mom's recipes. They steered her to La Cocina, where she developed her own business named after her mother. 5 years later, she caters and runs a kiosk, which is like a small food cart, at a small food cooperative in Bernal Heights, where some of her handmade patties have an Ethiopian twist because her husband's Ethiopian. Jones has big aspirations for Peaches Patties. The ultimate goal, she says, is to be the patty kingpin, which is leader of the West Coast. All right, so that was a lot of reading on my end. What you guys should have gotten out of this passage is that it's about La Cocina, which is this organization they defined for us as a business incubator. It's a company that helps other small startup like companies. And it's helped a bunch of people sort of start their own cooking business, whether that be a restaurant or just a food cart or whatever it is, or selling products. And then they told us that they are creating a new cookbook where they're telling us these recipes and also all the people's stories. And then they tell us that the National Public Radio interviewed these people, and there are a few of the chefs that share their stories, and we heard 2 stories from Mark O'Grady and Shani Jones. So that's kind of the big summary of the passage. Anybody have questions about the summary, what we read about, annotation? Okay, cool. So okay, and then they tell us about qualifications for La Cocina customers. So it seems like they tell us about all of these different aspects that they need to have in order for them to be a good fit for this company. So the goal is that they should have some sort of low income. Applicants must be classified as low or very low income. They also need a business plan. They need something that is like a product, right, for them to be able to sell it. And then passionate people. And then finally, community spirit, so diversity and community. So let's go ahead and tackle these questions. So we have the first one, says read the sentence from paragraph 2. 2 alumni from its culinary program were even recognized as semifinalists for prestigious James Beard Awards. Okay, so what kind of word is, what is like recognized or prestigious? Those good words or those bad words? Right? Good things, right? And these good things are describing who? Yeah, it's like they're positive, and we're talking about like awards, we're talking about recognition, we're talking about achievement, right? All of these words kind of go under the same umbrella. All right, so I want you guys to think about like an umbrella, not the best artist, right? And all of these words fall under the same umbrella, and we want to pick an answer choice that has a word that is from that similar umbrella. So they're using these words and they're boasting that this isn't some like, you know, silly company that nobody's heard about. This company, this culinary program, La Cocina, is creating like the highest chefs, right? Like they're getting these prestigious awards. It's not like some willy-nilly random company. It's actually producing these like big people, these recognized people, this prestige that are getting this prestigious award. And if we go back here, when they describe the awards, they say it's one of the highest honors in the culinary industry, right? So basically what they're trying to say about La Cucina is that it has the ability to, you know, like create very strong chefs, which is what choice F is saying, has the ability to mentor chefs to reach the highest level of achievement, right? So again, if we look at this term, highest level of achievement, we look at this recognized, we look at prestigious, and we look at the way that they define the James Beard Award, highest honor in the culinary industry. You'll notice a pattern, right? All of those terms are similar. Right? And that's why choice AF is the best answer. And that's why I tell you guys, match the language, right? They are already using these words. You just have to match. What's wrong with choice G is focused on establishing local entrepreneurs as celebrated professionals. The problem is that this is not true, right? It's just focused on helping these people, but it has the ability to also make them the highest in their craft, right? But their statement, their goal statement isn't like we're trying to make everybody get the award. They're just trying to help people out that are low income and that need this kind of support. So they're not focused on establishing them as this is the problem with choice G. And again, a big reading strategy is to pick like the open, not too like, don't put yourself into a box, right? Has the ability, right? Has the ability. Okay, of course, sure, it has the ability, but that's not its entire goal. It's not its entire focus. So try to pick choices that are not as closed off, I think is the best word. Or another way to say it is do not pick extreme choices. So pick words like, let me zoom in here. So positive, negative, right? So words like may, could, has the ability, These are nice, you know, neutral, sure, could happen. Do not pick like only, do not pick always, do not pick never. Even something like is focused on, just question, right? Is it really the main focus? That's what you want to be asking yourself before you pick a term like that. What's wrong with choice H? Who can tell me what's wrong with choice H? I think there's a few things wrong with it. One is it's kind of true, right? They want the chefs to develop new and innovative products. Kind of false because they kind of want them to already have their products and they just want to help them out. So it's a little bit too specific. But what I was also going for is it has nothing to do with the words recognized and prestigious, right? So what I want to tell you guys is even if the choice is true, if it doesn't answer the question, it's not the right choice, right? So you're not just picking something that sounds like true based on the passage, you're picking something that answers the question that they're asking you. So in this case, I'm looking for something to do with recognized, for prestigious, for these awards. I'm not looking for anything else. And for reading comp, I always read the passage first. You could like skim the questions quickly. Sometimes it helps students like focus on what they should be like reading, but I usually just read the passage first. Okay, cool. So let's keep going. Number 11. So we have paragraph 4 contributes to the development of La Cocina in paragraph 1 by blank. So now we have to go back and remind ourselves about paragraph 4 and paragraph 1. So here's paragraph 4. Here's paragraph 1. Paragraph 1 kind of just introduces us, right, to La Cocina, and it's telling us that it's helping local food entrepreneurs, and it's bringing up the fact that most of the people they help are low-income immigrant women. And then in paragraph 4, it tells us it's being more specific of how exactly they help. So it's telling us that they are helping them with the commercial kitchen. It's helping them with, it's giving them the kitchen space, it's giving them technical assistance for their business to be legal, helping them to develop business plans, city permits, and more. So this introduces the idea that they help, and paragraph 4 lists the specific way in which they help. That's the relationship between the two. And that's exactly choice A, right? Specifying how, and the key word I think is help, helps. Okay, let's look at all the other options here. Explaining what kind of goals, not really, and also it doesn't really set goals for them. Caleb Ziga is not one of the people that discovered the need to provide the assistance. That's what makes choice D wrong. And then finally C, it doesn't provide the background information. This is later on, right? This is the last 2 paragraphs that we read. Okay, next, the quotation conveys a central idea of the excerpt by. So let's go and find this quotation. Pretty easy to find because they tell us that it's in paragraph 6, so it's right here. So it's just an incredible and exciting range of techniques, flavors, perspective, age, and language. And that's a really beautiful thing. So age, language, flavors, and they're talking about all the mix between them. Does that make sense? So, and then he says it's a beautiful thing, right? So he's listing all of these different things, and then he's calling them beautiful. So we know that we're looking for a positive word, right? A positively connotated word. And all of these differences, and I think they specifically say range, right? Sorry, guys. So basically, they're trying to say that there's a lot of range of cuisines, there's a lot of range of people, there's a lot of range of the languages they speak, of the flavors they create, of the ages of the entrepreneurs. So all of that is kind of under the umbrella of diversity, and the showing appreciation is the positive part. This is the beautiful part. That's why the answer here is E. If we look at any of the other options, again, this word varying is good, right? Because it's similar to diverse. But the problem is that it doesn't mention, like, the focus isn't about people with varying abilities. Everybody should have good like cooking skills, right? The organization doesn't necessarily help people that aren't good chefs. So the choice F is just incorrect. It's not necessarily a typical scenario at La Cocina. He's just describing the diversity of people and techniques, but not a specific scenario. So that's why this is no good. And then finally, it's not emphasizing the focus on creating products. It's emphasizing the diversity of the people and of the foods. Okay, next, the description of Mariko Grady's background in paragraph 9 contributes to the central idea how. So Mariko Grady was the first paragraph that we read, and it talks about how she came from Japan, right? She has this immigrant background, just for us to review. And it shows us kind of, it tells us her story, right? And her story is specific that she was a dancer, and then she moved to LA, her company disbanded, and she was looking for something else to do, and she became successful at this. So that's why the answer here is choice C. It's showing how she was successful, even though she had a background in something entirely different. Now let's look at the options. The best option, I told you guys to stay away from extreme choices. This is the same thing as saying always right or never. Anything with the best is usually not the right answer, so I would eliminate that one right away. Also, her example for choice A does not necessarily describe what she was looking for. So I don't think A is the answer. And then finally D, it's not confirming that at all. Does that make sense? Even though now she is a food business owner, her story does more than showing that it's not just about this. So D is incorrect. Okay, which statement would the author most likely agree with? So for these types of questions, we use connotation. So does the author have a positive or negative opinion about La Cocina? What do you guys think? Positive, yeah, right, positive. So we're looking for a choice that says something good about La Cocina, and we're looking for a choice that's more general, right? Like the author isn't going to agree with like a small detail because we don't know. But we can make a general positive statement, and the author should agree with that. So if we look through the options, the publicity efforts La Cocina engages in will help its business design spread to other cities. Does the author bring up anything about other cities, or is he interested in their business design? Doesn't seem like it. It seems like they're just positively talking about and spreading awareness about this business. So I would get rid of E. F, the variety of exciting food is due to the work of La Cocina. I mean, maybe they helped, but can we say it's only due to the work? No, this is too strong of a statement, so we would get rid of this as well. Offers a method that will guarantee business ownership for qualified entrepreneurs. Again, guarantee. Do you guys see what I mean by like these extreme choices? Is due to, will guarantee. These are too extreme. And then finally, the correct answer, La Cocina does admirable work in supporting the efforts of ambitious cooks who may have few resources. And look at this pattern. Again, we have this word may that I love. A good answer always has a nice soft word like may. Does that make sense to you guys? Are you starting to notice the patterns? Okay, good. All right, last few, and we are done with our passage. So which piece of evidence from the excerpt is most relevant to the author's claim that La Cochina provides an opportunity to become more established as a business owner? So basically, we're looking for an evidence that supports being established as a business owner. That's what we're looking for. So the description of how the two alumni have won food awards. So the food awards are good, right? That's good, that's successful. But does that tell us anything about business ownership? Not necessarily. Next, the reference of the storytelling projects where chefs relate their own backgrounds and business experiences. Again, the storytelling project is nice. They describe that project, but the fact that the chefs are sharing their stories doesn't really tell us how specifically like La Cochina helps them become business owners. So this is again not related. See the list of necessities such as business plans and city permits that La Cochina assists with. This is practical things, right, that help them be established as a business owner. So business plans, city permits, and if we go back to the part in the passage where they told us about that, which is here, they specifically say in order for the businesses to be legally viable, right? So that's kind of the same language as this, established as a business owner, business to be legally viable. And that's when they tell us about this, which is why C is the best answer. And then finally, the criteria is necessary for them to apply to La Cochina, but that doesn't necessarily tell us about how they're going to become business owners themselves. Next, which would be most important to include in a summary, right? So we're looking for something integral, something that is just key to the passage. So what fact can we not go without? So produces a cookbook. I mean, that's important, but that's kind of an aside, right? Most of the biggest takeaway about this is what does La Cochina do, right? And at the end of the day, La Cochina is a company that gives assistance to small chefs in order for them to have legal businesses. And that's what choice F is saying, provides legal and technical assistance to its members. At the end of the day, that's the definition of La Cochina. And all these other things are just asides. And then finally, what does 17 do? I mean, what does the table do? Well, the table shows us that the applicants have to have certain things, right? They're not just going to take anybody under their belt. But as we can see from this table, the applicants have to be low income, but they also have to be self-motivated. They already have to come in with a product. They have to come in with a business plan. They have to come in with this kind of work ethic and with this community spirit, right? All of these have to be present in order for them to be able to join La Cochina. Which is what this is saying, emphasizing that applicants must be willing to dedicate their time to promoting and developing their business. And the key is that it's about applicants, right? So that part is about applicants. That part is not really about La Cochina. That part is not really about La Cochina's goal. It's about what the applicants have to be ready with. So you would get rid of A and C and you're really choosing between B and D. And the reason B and D is wrong is because this is about leaving La Cochina and the table shows like what's necessary to apply, not leave. So that's why B is incorrect. Okay, how is everybody doing? Put something in the chat so I know that the 110 of you guys are still awake and listening and paying attention. Good? Okay, good. Any questions about this passage? All right, awesome. Tired, but doing good. Thank you for the honesty. So we're almost done. We have 30 minutes left. We have time for one more passage, I think. I think this is a good one for us to do because it's different, right, than the last one. There's two main genres that you'll see on these tests. Some of the passages are more like figurative, some of the passages are more like literary. The one that we just read was kind of like the typical newspaper article. It's pretty structured. This one is a little bit more literary, right? It's there's dialogue in here. It seems like it's going to be more about like character development, more about dialogue, more about turning point. There might be like a story involved, right? A little bit different than the previous passage. So I think this will be a good one for us to read together and to contrast how the different strategies can be used for a passage like this. And yeah, so we're going to go ahead and read it and tackle this and then close off our session. So as always, what we're going to start with is we're going to read the title. It says "From In Search of the Unknown," and it's another excerpt. And then they kind of give us nothing, right? So nothing for us to go on. Sometimes they give you like a little blurb underneath. I love when they give us that blurb because it really helps my brain frame kind of what we're going to be reading about. But we didn't get so lucky here. So we kind of have nothing. So with these kinds of passages, it's just best to hit the ground running and go ahead and start reading. Same sort of annotation strategies and connotation strategies we'll be using that I already talked about, so I won't repeat it. Okay, so it was at that time the policy of the trustees and officers of the zoological gardens neither to employ collectors nor to send out expeditions in search of specimens. Okay, so it seems like right away the language is a little bit hard, but what I'm getting out of the first line is that there's a policy of these zoological gardens that they do not employ collectors and they do not send out expeditions in search of specimens. Okay. The society decided to depend upon voluntary contributions, and I was always busy, part of the day in dictating answers to correspondents who wrote offering their services as hunters of big game, collectors of all sorts of fauna, trappers, snarers, and also to those who offered specimens for sale, usually at exorbitant rates. Okay, so a few things. So first of all, it seems like this society of zoo gardens or whatever it is does not have a job, does not employ people to go out and collect specimens, and it does not send out their employees to go out and employ and collect specimens. Instead, they choose to focus on voluntary contributions. So whoever wants to just donate a specimen, right? That's what voluntary means. And then whoever I is, right? That's really important. So with these, again, I'm big on pronouns, right? Because we now know that whoever is telling us the story is the I in this passage, right? So right away, you should be thinking like, from whose perspective am I being told the story? So right away, I'm curious who I is. And whoever I is tells me that this is a narrative passage, right? Whoever I is telling me their story. And whoever I is basically part of his job is that he was busy answering all these people who were offering their service as either hunters or collectors or who were selling specimens for exorbitant rates, right? So that it was very expensive. So to the proprietors of mangy lynxes, moth-eaten coyotes, and dancing bears, what's the theme here? What's the commonality, right? All of these are just like these crazy outlandish things, right? What the heck is a mangy lynx or a moth-eaten coyote or a dancing bear, right? It sounds like funky or like out there. And the narrator is telling us that he returned courteous but uncompromising refusals, right? So he was telling them like, no, thank you. Of course, first submitting all such letters together with my reply to Professor Farrago. So now we have this new character, right? We have I, whoever is telling us the story, and now we have Professor Farrago. One day towards the end of May, however is also important because it's telling me that something's about to change, right? So something is about to change. There might be some turning point, some big event happening. And I would circle May also because it tells me the setting or the time period. As I was leaving Bronx Park to return to town, Professor Lessard, okay, another new guy, of the reptilian department called out to me that Professor Farrago wanted to see me a moment. So I retraced my steps to the temporary wooden building occupied by Professor Farrago, General Superintendent of the Zoological Gardens. So now we define who this guy is, right? He's a superintendent of this company. The professor, who was sitting at his desk before a pile of letters and replies submitted for approval by me, pushed his glasses down and looked over them with me with a whimsical smile that suggested amusement, impatience, annoyance, and perhaps a faint trace of apology. So a lot of adjectives here, right? Whimsical, amusement, impatience, annoying, and faint trace of apology. So this is very nuanced, right? It's hard for me to tell you guys whether it's positive or negative. But it seems like we have some mix, but the vibe isn't overarchingly like negative, right? If someone's apologizing to you, if they're smiling at you whimsically, if there's some amusement, overall those are positives with like a tinge of impatient and annoyance, but in the way that you might be impatient or annoyed like at a friend or at a sibling, not like strong negative hatred. Does that make sense? Like my interpretation based on those words? Okay, so let's keep reading. Now, here's a letter, he said, with deliberate gesture towards a sheet of paper impaled on a file. A letter that I suppose you remember. He disengaged the sheet of paper and handed it to me. Oh, yes, I replied with a shrug. Of course, the man is mistaken, or... So who is the man they're talking about here? Anyone? Yeah, the guy writing the letter, right? So this is the guy from the letter. Good. I'm just checking that you guys are with me. Or what? Demanded Professor Farrago, tranquilly wiping his glasses. Okay, so now we see the vibes changing a little bit, right? Demanded. That term is more like, a demand. So now, like with that, he could have just said, or what, said Professor Farrago, or asked Professor Farrago. But demanded implies some sort of like urgency, and it's a little bit more negative. And then we have or a liar, which again is a little bit of a more negative term. Okay. After a silence, he leaned back in his chair and bade me read the letter to him again, and I did so with a very contemptuous tolerance for the writer, who must have been either a very innocent victim or a very stupid swindler. I said as much to Professor Farrago, but to my surprise, he appeared to waver. So how does the narrator feel about the letter guy? So start basic, good or bad? Yeah, something bad, right? He doesn't like him. So he's either this is just a victim and it's just somebody like who doesn't get it, or he's just a bad liar, right? And this term, contemptuous tolerance, like he's just like tolerating him in this letter because he has to, because this professor's asking him to read it. Okay, now the professor responds, I suppose, he said with his nearsighted, embarrassed smile, that 999 men in 1,000 would throw that letter aside and condemn the writer as a liar or a fool. So the professor is saying, like, you're right, like 99.9% of people would agree with you. And the narrator says, in my opinion, said I, he's one or the other. He's confirming, yeah, that's what I think. I think he's either a liar or a fool. And then the professor says, he isn't in mine, said the professor placidly. So here the professor is disagreeing. He's saying, well, I don't think this is the first time that the professor is like, well, maybe there's something true about him, right? Something that he's saying in this letter that I actually do agree with. What does placidly mean? Just to define that word for you guys, it means like simply or like calmly, right? So this guy has a very interesting sort of vibe about him, right? Here we also use the word tranquilly, calmly, but then at the same time, like he's like demanding and he's kind of bringing him into this room and like kind of like there's like this confrontation happening between them as well. So it's like this interesting dichotomy. And now the narrator says, what? And look at this word exclaimed, right? Like what? Meaning he's like shocked, right? We have an exclamation point. Here is a man living all alone on a strip of rock and sand between the wilderness and the sea, who wants you to send somebody to take charge of a bird that doesn't exist. So now we understand sort of the context of the letter, right? It seems like whoever wrote this letter was saying like that they spotted some crazy bird. Okay. How do you know, asked Professor Farrago, that the bird in question does not exist? It is generally accepted, I replied sarcastically, that the great auk has been extinct for years. Therefore, I may be pardoned for doubting there are correspondent possesses a pair of them alive. So again, notice the tone, right? Like sarcastically, like the narrator is still like, you know, this guy in the letter is Cocoa for Cocoa Puffs, right? Like, I don't believe him. It's common knowledge that this bird is extinct. But the professor, for some reason, believes him. So as we keep going, he says, oh, you young fellow, said the professor, smiling warily, you embark on a theory for destinations that don't exist. He leaned back in his chair, his amused eyes searching space for the imagery that made him smile. Like swimming squirrels, you navigate with the help of heaven and a stiff breeze, but you never land where you hope to, do you? So what is the professor now saying? Like, what's his vibe? First of all, young fellows, right? He's saying like, oh, you young people. And then he's swimming squirrels. What do you guys think that means? Do we think of squirrels as like Olympic swimmers? What could that expression be meaning? Is he giving these young people a compliment, or is he more like poking fun of them? Yeah, like they're helpless, right? He's saying like something bad about them, right? Like you guys are young, you're like swimming squirrels, like you navigate with the help of heaven, right? Like the heavens and God is helping you, and you don't end up where you're supposed to. And that embarrasses the narrator, right? So the narrator says, rather red in the face, I said, don't you believe the great auk to be extinct? So he's kind of embarrassed, right? At the reply, like he feels like, what am I not getting? And then the professor says, a Dubon saw the great oak, and a Dubon is this ornithologist or artist. And then the narrator says, who has seen a single specimen since? And the professor says, nobody except the guy who wrote the letter, right? And he's laughing about it. I laughed too, considering the interview at an end, but the professor went on coolly. Whatever it is that our correspondent has, and I am daring to believe that it is the great auk itself, I want you to secure it for the society. And notice the way that this word is, right? It's italics. And why is the author italicizing this? It's for emphasis, right? When my astonishment subsided, my first conscious sentiment was one of pity. Clearly, Professor Farrago was on the verge of dotage. So he's basically saying, like, first I was shocked, and then I felt pity, right? I felt bad for this old professor because he must be like losing his mind because he's getting old. Ah, what a loss to the world, right? I believe now that Professor Farrago perfectly interpreted my thoughts, but he betrayed neither resentment nor impatience. I drew up a chair beside his desk. There was nothing to do but to obey, right? He is his boss, so he had to listen. And this fool's errand was none of my conceiving. Together, we made out a list of articles necessary for me and itemized the expenses I might incur, and I set a date for my return, allowing no margin for a successful termination to the expedition. Never mind that, said the professor. What I want you to do is to get those birds here safely. Now, how many men will you take? So the professor's serious, right? He's like, I think these birds exist. You should go get them. And the narrator like has to obey, but he's like, this is dumb. Like he doesn't actually think that he needs any people or any help because he doesn't actually believe these birds exist. So he replies, none, bluntly. It's a useless expense unless there is something to bring back. If there is, I'll wire you, you may be sure. Very well, said the professor good-humoredly. You shall have all the assistance you may require. Can you leave tonight? The old gentleman was certainly prompt. I nodded half sulkily, aware of his amusement. So the vibe is that the narrator is like kind of upset, right? Sulkily, when you're sulking, it's like when you're sad about something. And the professor finds this whole thing kind of funny. So I said, picking up my hat, I am to start north to find a place called Black Harbor, where there is a man called Haylard who possesses, among other household utensils, 2 extinct great auks. And again, he's very sarcastic here, right? Like he's saying, like, among everything else, like among his forks and knives, he also possesses these extinct birds, right? So he's being very sarcastic. That's the tone. We were both laughing. By this time, I asked him why on earth he credited the assertion of a man he had never before heard of. I suppose he replied with the same half apologetic, half humorous smile, "It is instinct." I feel somehow that this man Haler has got an auk, perhaps two. I can't get away from the idea that we are on the eye of acquiring the rarest of creatures. It's odd for a scientist to talk as I do. Doubtless you're shocked. Admit it now. But I was not shocked. On the contrary, I was conscious that the same strange hope that Professor Farrago cherished was beginning, in spite of me, to stir my pulses too. So it seems like at the end, like he's kind of excited by this too. If he has, I began, then stopped. The professor and I looked hard at each other in silence. Go on, he said encouragingly, but I had nothing more to say, for the prospect of beholding with my own eyes a living specimen of the great auk produced by a series of conflicting emotions within me, which rendered speech profoundly superfluous. All right, so we got to the end, right? But the important thing that I wanted you guys to notice is the different sort of intonations and intentions and tones between the two different characters and how those changed in the beginning. And now at the end, it seems like even the narrator is kind of excited about this. And even the narrator has some hope in his head that maybe he's right. Maybe I will bring back this, so thought extinct species. Okay. Any questions after we read this together? All right, so let's run through the questions and I'll let you guys go for tonight. So this passage from paragraph 2 was basically saying how, like it's establishing that the narrator, his job is to write back to all these people that have these crazy claims and tell them and like refuse them, basically tell them like, no, thank you, we're not interested. And as he's writing these responses, he also has to run them by Professor Farrago because he's his boss. So basically, remember we talked about these lines. We talked how they're like very outlandish, right? Like a dancing bear, it's not real. Moth-eaten coyote. So basically, he's writing these refusals to people because he believes that most of these animals are not acceptable for the society. Most of this is just like random claims. So that's why the answer is choice G. Okay, next, the professor who was sitting at his desk before a pile of letters and replies submitted for approval for me pushed his glasses down and looked over them with a whimsical smile that suggested amusement, impatient annoyance, and a faint trace of apology. So we talked about this line before, right? This is when the narrator first comes into the room. And the professor kind of like the fact that he's looking at him with all these mixed emotions, he knows that the narrator is going to be like, are you crazy? Like, obviously this bird is extinct, right? He knows that this conversation is going to be frustrating for the narrator. And that's why he's already kind of has this like apologetic look to him, because he kind of knows that what he's asking seems crazy, but he just has this intuition that it's real. So that's why the best answer here is choice D. Exactly. Okay, great. Now the next one, how does the exchange between the professor and the narrator in these paragraphs contribute to the development of the characters? So let's look at these paragraphs. These are very early on, right? And very early on, the narrator is kind of just like, this guy is crazy. And then the professor is like, yeah, 99.9% of people would agree with you. But in my opinion, he's not crazy. And the narrator is kind of very shocked at this, right? So how did those develop the characters? It kind of gives us and understanding that there's going to be this conflict, right? It starts, the key, I think, is it establishes, right? That's the very beginning of their conversation. And it begins this conflict between the professor and the narrator. And it's all about the validity of the letter, right? Whether the person is telling the truth, whether he's a fool or a liar, whether he really has these extinct auks. Okay, the next one, 21, the professor's observations in paragraphs 15 to 17. So this is when he's kind of making fun of these young fellows, right? So he's like, young fellows, and he calls them swimming squirrels. Right? And this is going to offend the narrator, right? It's going to embarrass the narrator. So we're looking for a choice that says something like that. It's going to embarrass, or it's going to annoy the narrator, something negative. So if we look at these options, the best one is this one, choice A. He becomes red in the face. And the reason why that's the choice is because the answer, like, he replies, don't you believe the great auk is extinct, right? So this is the part, right? He has a logic, right? He's not just denying this guy's letter for no reason, but he knows that the bird is extinct. So that's why he's getting so flustered and embarrassed, because he's like, I have this logic, and that's why he's flustered by the criticism. Does that make sense? I think choice B is a hard one not to pick in this case, because annoyed is another good one. It's similar to like embarrassed. It's a part of like their relationship, right? They're both a little bit annoyed at each other. I think flustered is better here, like red in the face. The word that I was thinking as I was reading is embarrassed, and I think embarrassed is a little bit closer to flustered than annoyed. But also the professor is not really so sarcastic. He's very direct. The narrator is more sarcastic, but the professor isn't being sarcastic. He's just saying, you're young, you're inexperienced, you're like a swimming squirrel, like you don't really know what you're doing in life. So he's not really being so sarcastic. The narrator is more sarcastic. So that's why choice B isn't the best one here. Okay, the next one, how does the interaction between the narrator and the professor later on contribute to the development of themes? So later on in lines 26 to 28, now it's kind of like the narrator has basically said that he's admitting that he has to go, right? Because this is his boss, but he's not taking it seriously, right? He doesn't think that he's actually needs any people with him. He doesn't think he needs any tools, because he doesn't think that he's really going to come back with anything. So it shows that the narrator is accepting his assignment because he has to, because his boss, this professor, is telling him to. But despite his personal objections, he still is objecting. He still personally doesn't believe it's going to come back with anything. Now this one is asking us, why is the professor even sending him on an expedition? Like, what's the ultimate goal? And the ultimate thing that's kind of motivating the professor is that he believes in his heart that he's about to get the auk. He believes that he's on the verge of getting this. And that's what choice D says. He says, I can't get away from the idea that we're on the eve of acquiring the rarest of living creatures. So his intuition is telling him that this is worth it because they're going to actually get these birds. Next is asking us about paragraph 34, developing the plot. So paragraph 34 is when the narrator actually starts switching over to the same side as the professor. So he has now the same strange hope. So it shows that the narrator is actually beginning to consider the possibility of finding these birds himself. And the possibility, the word that matches that is strange hope from those lines. Okay, the last two, just to finish us up, which sentence best demonstrates the professional relationship between the narrator and the professor? Well, what is their relationship, right? It's narrator to professor. And it shows that even though the narrator may disagree with the professor, he still has to obey him, right? That's their relationship. That's their professional relationship. And that's what choice C says. And the key is to obey. There was nothing to do but obey, right? That's their professional relationship, that the professor has the final say. And there's details in the passage that suggest that also. If you guys remember early on, it says that he always has to submit these letters to Professor Farrago. He can't just deny people himself, right? So there's this working relationship, that Farrago is the boss and he's underneath him. And then finally, the last one, how does the author develop the contrast between the narrator's point of view and the professor's point of view? And the way that we develop that contrast as we were reading is it's all about the conversation, right? Like, we don't have anything else. Most of the passage is their conversation. So through their conversation, how they're replying to each other, the tones that they're using is how we learn what their different points of view are on this topic of this letter and whether or not it's real. And that's key here, by using the conversation. All right, so I was rushing a little bit at the end because I wanted to make sure that we got through this passage, but I can now take any questions that you guys have. So somebody said, how do you know when something's important? That's a loaded question, right? So that comes with experience, but that also comes with just practice, understanding themes, understanding tones, understanding when things change. All of that is always important. Understanding at the beginning of the paragraph, there's usually like general statements about the topic. Those are usually more important. Words that keep repeating are important. So in the first passage that we read, like, it was clear that La Cocina was the topic. It kept repeating. So that tells me that when I'm answering a main idea question, I need the words La Cocina to be in there. Or the previous passage about Mars rover, things that keep repeating are important. Positive or negative, I look at the adjectives and I try to ask myself, are those positive or negative words? So words like valuable, clearly a good thing. Words like successful, a good thing. I recommend reading the passage before the questions. Of course, some of the questions will be really easy, and some of the questions will be harder. That's the truth for anything. Have you failed a test like ever? You guys are funny. I feel like I'm on an interview. I'm interviewing for residency now, and that's like, they're like, tell me about a time that you failed, or tell me about your hardest experience. And I feel like you guys are continuing my interview. Sure, everybody fails tests. You fail practice tests, you give up, you get up and you keep going. That's my advice. And you don't fail the real thing, right? That's why you guys are all here practicing. What do you do when you see a word that you don't know at all? I try to use the root of the word. If I just can't think of any other word that sounds similar to it, then I just use context. So around it, I look for words close to it. Are those words positive or negative? I try to make sense of the sentence even without understanding that word and think how that word could contribute. You guys are bombarding me with questions. Okay, let's do one thing at a time. Somebody said they've run out
Olga, you're never leaving. You're never leaving.
I'm trapped.
Okay, go ahead. Guys, just keep going, guys. I'll pay for it. I mean, what's another hour at this point? No, I'm kidding. 10 more minutes, Go.
I run out of time for reading because I do math section first. Do you have any advice for going really fast? I think it's not about going fast when you run out of time. It's more about pacing yourself to prevent yourself from getting to that point where you're already out of time and you're panicking and you have to go really fast. So you have to pace yourself. So do not spend too much time on one question. If you can't figure it out, just move on, because that one question is not worth like 10 questions wrong later down because you're rushing. It's better to get one hard question wrong and get 10 easy questions right versus then get one question right and 10 easy questions wrong because you never got to them, or because you didn't leave enough time for them, or because you couldn't focus at the end when you're rushing. So you have to learn to start pacing yourself. That's why we recommend having the clock or the watch in front of you the whole time. That's why we recommend kind of, if you're stuck on a question, like after 2 minutes, you should just force yourself to move on. And you can always annotate it, start, and go back when you have extra time. What to do with hard fiction passages like this one? You dissect them. That's what you do. The way that we did together, you look for themes, you look for the vibes of the different characters, how they're talking to each other, and then you use all the strategies to get the questions right. So you avoid the extreme answer choices, you match the language in the passage or in the sentences that they're pointing out. You try to match one of those words into a word in the answer choice. You lean on your strategies and on your own intuition, because you guys have been practicing and reading so much that you lean towards the right answer, even if you don't always know how to explain why that's the right answer. How to keep up energy during long tests. Stamina is so important. Usually what I do is I take like really short breaks. So I'll stretch, or I'll just like close my eyes and try to like meditate or imagine something like what I'm going to treat myself to after the test, whatever it is, just like that 15-30 second break. And it kind of like revives my brain. I love having something to look forward to after the test, because it's like my motivation to finish. And we talked about this during our stress reduction. So plan something fun after. Have something to look forward to kind of keep your energy up during this test, to know that, you know, the finish line is near. And when I get to that finish line, I have something fun waiting for me. What to do when you're stuck between two choices. I think you have to, first of all, it's good, right? Like you already got down to 2, right? So now you're at a 50-50. So you're already in a good place. The next thing that I would do is I would try to prove myself, like if you had to argue why this choice is wrong or why that choice is wrong, try to look for the mistakes in it and try to see if you're falling for any of those like mistakes that they constantly get you on. So an answer, make sure that it's answering the question, that it's not just true to the passage. Make sure that it's not too extreme. It doesn't have any of those words we talked about, or the opposite, look for a word that is good, like may, and maybe that will sway you towards the right answer. How do you focus for the whole time? Again, it's just about reflecting, taking those small breaks if you need to. If you notice that you're not focusing, change your approach. Like if you can't force yourself, like if you keep reading the same passage, it's not going, I would switch to the math section, right? You have those 3 hours, you have to use them and work with your brain the most effectively as possible. How should you read a text quickly? You should just read it and do the annotation strategies that we talked about. What to do the day before the test. Light reviewing, nothing crazy, nothing brand new. Are we allowed? You can bring snacks, but you can't eat it during the exam. So you can eat it right before or right after, but you can definitely bring snacks and keep them in your bag. What section do I recommend starting with? Really doesn't matter. I would do what you guys have been doing this whole time. What to do if you don't understand the question, reread the question, because most likely you're just not reading the question correctly. If you notice, the questions are very standard. How does this paragraph develop the passage? What do you think the author would agree with? What is the main idea? So it's very unlikely that you would not understand the question, because they're very, very standard. Yeah, most of the answers are in the story, like 99.9% of them. What if you panic while reading a hard passage? You have to get to strategies of knowing how to calm yourself down. First of all, it's just an exam, right? It's so important that you realize that the exam does not define you. You worked really hard, you're really smart, you're established, regardless of how the exam goes. So all of that should help you not panic. And then just falling back on the strategies. Even when I don't understand something, I'm still capable of answering the questions correctly because of all the practice that I've did, because of all the strategies, and because I can match the words. That's what you're going to tell yourself in that moment when you're panicking. That's what you should tell yourself before the exam. You should stand in front of the mirror and do your affirmations and say, I don't need to understand 100% of what I read to do well on this exam. My advice on poetry, I can't give you guys like a 5-minute rundown of poetry at this time, but we did do poetry in our grammar webinar, like a full hour of it. And I think those were already sent out to you guys. So I would refer back to those videos to review poem strategies. I believe that you can use highlighters, but I'm not 100% sure. I would check the website before you go in. The test is mostly multiple choice. There's 5 math questions that you have to fill in a number that you get. Can you have a little candy in your mouth during the test? Probably not, would be my guess, but I would check that as well. Yeah, eating is not allowed during the test. If you don't get into a good school, can you still do well in your career? 100,000,000%. As important as your school is, it's not going to define your career. You guys have your whole lives ahead of you. Do not stress. There's like this little graph that I love teaching that you learn in medicine, and it's like the perfect amount of stress, right? Because if you have too little stress, then you're lazy, you don't do anything. You got too much stress, you're completely anxious and you can't do well. So there's this happy medium of stress, and that's where you want to be. That's where performance is your best, right? Because you're stressed, that creates these hormonal responses in your brain, and you have adrenaline and you're more awake and you're more focused. But you're not too stressed that you're way too anxious and you can't function. So you guys have to focus on keeping yourselves at that good level of stress, right? So understand that it's an important test. You guys have worked hard on it. It's great to go to one of these specialized high schools, but it's definitely not the end of the world if you don't, right? So happy level, medium level of stress for your best performance. Yes, tomorrow I'll go over the grid-in questions for the math. Tomorrow will be full math day. Okay, I think I answered most of the questions. Tomorrow's webinar is going to be the same time, 5 to 7 tomorrow.
Everybody, let's take a moment to type thank you, because Olga has spent so much time during her medical school career doing these webinars. So we're going to write thank you. Ready? Hello. Okay, we're going to write thank you. Let me keep going. Are we all type? Oh, wait, can you open it, Olga? Can you open the chat to all, everyone can chat?
Yep.
Who wants to see a 2.5?
Hi, Jessica. Hi.
Who wants to see a cute dog? Goldie, where are you? Who wants to see a very cute dog? Goldie, I have news to tell everyone in the Zoom. You are the first ones to know. We are getting a second dog tomorrow. We will have a baby Maltipoo tomorrow. Goldie is 13 years old. Hello, Goldie. Goldie is hold on, guys. Let me adjust this backdrop. Hold on, guys, 1 second. But we have big news to tell you. Okay, hold on just a minute. Let me try this. Hold on. Just a second. Olga, wish them good luck as I'm figuring
Good luck, guys. But I want to see all of you guys tomorrow. So this is not my official good luck. I'll give you my official good luck tomorrow. Thank you, guys.
Sure, just 1 moment. Okay. Hold on, everyone. We're going on. Okay. Okay. Working so great. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm trying. Hold on, Goldie. Goldie, you don't look very zoomable. Hold on. Goldie, I'm not getting like the best like dog backgrounds. Sorry, guys. Hold on. I'm gonna give it one more effort. Chat. Let me get rid of my backgrounds, and then I'm giving you the dog moments. Here's my co-host. It's not going so great with this dog thing. Goldie. You know, I really got, oh, there we go. We got her. There we go. Hello. Goldie, stay in that, there we go. Goldie, look here. Go here. Okay. All right, everyone. I wish you good luck. Thank you, Olga, for doing this, and we're logging off. Okay. Take care. All my
Thank you
love.
guys. See
Bye.
you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.